right, welcome back, everyone. Now, really exciting. We're mixing things up a bit. We've had speakers, we've had talks. Now we're going to have a panel discussion. Okay, I've got next to me 3 experts in their fields, so I'm not going to include myself in that at all. I'm actually going to ask them to introduce themselves because I think they can do it much better than I can. And I'm going to jump over and ask Anne to maybe begin.
Well, you've picked the weirdest person because I'm the weirdest person. NatWest Group. I've got multiple hats. So I'm CEO of a company called learning development company called Strategically Green. I'm the author of O'Reilly's first book on building green software. It's called. It's about how the tech industry will align with the future of renewable power. But the weird thing is that I'll hopefully be adding some thoughts to this panel on is that I'm also the author of a science fiction series about AI and the future of technology called the Panopticon series. So that's my slightly weird take on this panel today.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Gostev Madzu. I'm a global expert on AI governance. I've been in this field for the last 10 years, again, 9 years now. I started off working for French government. I'm one of the co-drafters of the French AI national strategy. Then I worked at the World Economic Forum, advised many governments and businesses on responsible AI. And more recently, I was working at a startup called Currie in the ML observability space, for those of you who are familiar. And we were acquired by Snowflake last year. I was the director of strategy. And now I'm an independent AI governance consultant.
Awesome. And yes, Peter.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter. I work for Moonpig, and I lead our AI function there. So it's basically on the applied side, introducing AI in various different ways. You might have seen, I don't know if you're a customer, I'm curious, but we launched AI sticker generator recently. So that was my team working on that, which is really fun. Some interesting details we had to work through. But apart from that, before that, I was in financial services, working for a bank before, so closer to the city, also working on AI applications.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us. And the reason we've gathered these wonderful people together with us today is to have a discussion on responsibility when we're using AI and transforming our futures. So I'm going to kick things off and ask the question. I'll start with Anne again. What is responsibility to you in this world now? So what really comes to your mind and what are you passionate about?
So there are, I think in terms of responsible AI, there are kind of two strands. There's how do we make it so that it isn't just broken? How do we make it so that it does the right thing? It does what we're expecting it to do. So that's governance, testing, all that kind of stuff. That's really important. But I would say equally important, that's about changing the technology. But to my mind is also what is equally important, in fact, even more important, is changing us as consumers. So that when we interact with technology, and this is true not just of AI, but it's an extreme case AI, that we interact with it mindfully, carefully, and we engage our brains. So the best example of this, I think that the potential problems here are is something that happened in the UK that every single person in this room will know all about, which is the Horizon scandal, where let's face it, it's an old-fashioned piece of technology. Basically, it's like the spreadsheet says this person should go to prison, and everybody goes, "Well, the spreadsheet said so. Let's put them in prison." Horizon wasn't even a convincing piece of software. Everyone knew it was full of bugs. And yet people were still happy to say, well, Horizon says we should put them in prison. Let's put them in prison. AI will be so much more convincing, but it is still error prone. It will still always contain errors. There's no way that you can take all the errors out of everything. So we, as users, humanity, has to be much, much better at not going along with it and saying, there's a famous psychology professor, Solomon Asch, around the dangers of just going along with stuff. The banality of evil is Hannah Arendt rather than Solomon Asch, but the same kind of thing. We cannot afford to just go along with it. We have to got to apply my own instincts to this. So that's my take on this.
Yeah, I would very much echo your points. Actually, I think there are two levels to this. There's one level which is about how to make AI works, because newsflash, AI doesn't work most of the time, especially in enterprise environments. And that has been my line of work for the last, I said, decade, which is really about, for me, trustworthy AI means ensuring that the behavior of a model is consistent with a set of requirements, quality requirements. Obviously, core performance, depending on the task, but also biases, fairness, robustness. You can come up with a lot of quality requirements. And I've been thinking about the policies, the tools, the processes that you should put in place so that AI does what's supposed to be doing. That's one level. And there's another one, which is more philosophical, which is to say, where should we be using AI to the benefits of human flourishing? Right. And I'm looking at this more about the use of AI in education, for instance. Everyone, we're talking about AI tutors, to what extent they can complement, replace, support teachers. How does it affect teaching? That's a second layer. But first, we need to make sure that this thing works before we can profitably discuss how should we be using it.
Peter, you're one of the people trying to make it work, right? And in an applied way. And yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah, so for me, that's really the main point about making it work. So for me, responsible AI, I think generally people have pretty good judgment about what they want to put to production. If it's generating some bad images, we don't want to put an image generator into the world, or at least from our brand perspective. And the same if you work for a bank, you don't really want to put some crazy mortgage advisor into production. I think people understand that. So for me, being in the direction of responsible AI, for me, the main thing to make sure that it is ready for production, that we can make it work. And part of it is just models need to get better. And I think sometimes people try GPT 3.5 and it was very flaky, which it was. And they kind of said, okay, AI is bad. But now if you try later models, they're so much better. So it's worth just really granular understanding what are the capabilities of the models. And you can only do that by playing with them. And beyond that, also understanding where they fail and then what extra maybe guardrails we need to put in place. And whenever you actually have to deploy these models into some product, you have to really understand it in detail. And then you know how far you can push it, where you shouldn't go, and what extra capabilities you need to put in place.
And I think what you mentioned there is no adverse impacts. And I'm gonna maybe throw a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons here. We've got different angles here where, Lofred, you've worked a lot on regulation and the public side of things, and adverse impacts mean something totally different when you're protecting the public. And Pete, I'm not gonna paint you here as a fat cat capitalist, but still you have a agenda, you have a business that you need to work on. So who should be responsible for what? And what is the balance of power there?
This one is interesting. I think ultimately we always have an intuition about who's responsible for what, because you never operate in a vacuum. It's really obvious. If you are, let's say, a bank in the UK, you work under a specific jurisdiction, you have some regulation, so that the different layers of responsibility actually is quite known usually. And one thing I would like to say about AI is that it doesn't fundamentally change the chain of responsibility. It's really important. Ultimately, there's just a new model, and you shouldn't be confused about that. And there's a temptation sometimes in AI to think that we can reboot the whole world and everything has changed and upside down. That's not the case, especially in highly regulated industries. I've been working a lot with financial services and banks. The question is never about how to change everything so that it fits AI. It's much more how to make sure that AI is under control within our existing framework, under our existing responsibilities. And that's the trick, otherwise you get kind of carried away. So responsibilities are not changed fundamentally, but I think the process to hold people accountable have changed a lot, and the tools as well. My take, at least.
Yeah, in terms of capitalism, and I'll play that part. I think it is a good thing that for us, when we build new features, we've got a grounding point where we align. Is someone actually going to buy the stuff? Are people interested? And if we release a feature and no one cares and it's a bad quality and it generates some weird stuff, no one wants to use it. So it's a nice way to align. It's not ideal, but it's much better than just philosophizing about it. So for us, whenever we deploy things like that, we always look at metrics, and there would be maybe softer metrics of complaints or things like that. And then if we do something really bad that damages our brand, that's also impacting the profit line. So I think it is a nice way to align. So I'm definitely not against that.
So I think it's an interesting question. I'll take a slightly different angle on it, which is who's going to hold you accountable if it goes wrong? And it feels like there are lots of different groups who can and will hold AI companies accountable for AI. You've got governments. So that's quite the almost the European way is to say, look, don't do these things, and we're going to hold you accountable if you do it. You've got courts. The American way is the court holds people accountable, holds companies accountable. You get the patent suit off you, and that is also can be a very effective way of doing it. But there's also people, individuals, groups within society who hold folk accountable and complain and say, well, actually, no, we're not going to buy off you anymore because we don't like. We're going to set your cars on fire. We are going to, we're going to vote with our feet. We are going to do that. But the thing I was talking about earlier about every single person, this is going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to be pumping out a whole load of information, a whole load of instructions, a whole load of ideas to us. As individuals, we need also to hold ourselves accountable and hold it accountable and say, well, do I want to comply with this? Do I want to challenge it? So the answer is everybody's going to have to hold it accountable. I don't think there's any avoiding that. I would say. What do folk think?
There's interesting point about accountability again at a very practical level. Is that my view is that to really be properly accountable or hold someone to account, you really need to understand at the granular level what the technology is doing and what are the potential fault lines. So, for example, in image generation, if you're kind of a general, court oversight government, you don't really understand the detail. You can look at it and say it's fine, or maybe you can identify some issues. But because I've been playing these models like every day and we test them many different ways, I would have much, much better view of where the problems are. And okay, I can choose not to highlight them and so on, but I think it's either the accountability should still sit with the people who are the closest to the models, or the people who do the oversight, they really have to go down and test this stuff. It's really hard to guess where the model would go wrong. So without actually playing with them, I don't see how you can provide meaningful oversight.
Just to add to this point, you add a key word for me, which is testing. So I've been in the testing space for a while, and in financial services, I won't name any clients. Sometimes there's a temptation because we're testing software at Rare, right? Say, okay, you help me test this model, and ultimately what I want is a seal of approval that somehow, it checks all the boxes I can deploy. We cannot give you this seal of approval. We're not a certification body. We're not, working on standards. But a lot of people doing great work in that space, by the way, in the EU context. But ultimately, we have the business stakeholders who are responsible for the kind of models they use to push their business products out there. And this doesn't change because AI comes into the room. You still hold accountable for your business practices. I think what these people need more is guidance on how to maintain this level of accountability with that very new piece of software. And that's where I think we can help them profitably.
The thing that comes to my mind when I think of accountability, and over in the blue stage, Johan mentioned like incentives and actually drive. Why would you need to do this? And it reminds me of like carrots and sticks. And what I've noticed in the news recently, there's some approaches like, okay, here's the carrot for why you should invest in AI and do this stuff. Very British government will throw billions at it. And then there's the stick, there's the regulations, and nothing against regulations, Lawford. I'm sure the ones you wrote are fantastic. Like, is there a thing to discuss here with incentives? Because what we've seen is, okay, most of the incentives are actually much better in the private sector, and it's easier to disrupt and get paid for it and become a billionaire, perhaps, than it is to go public sector and take people to court for doing bad, naughty things. So have you come into that?
Yeah, often when I work with clients, I tell them that there are, for me, two line of arguments. One is defensive argument, why you should make sure that your AI is working. To your point, you might get fined. You work in highly regulated environments. You may put people's health at risk, for instance, in pharma and healthcare. This thing has to work, right? Or in financial services, you might undermine people access to credit. It might be really consequential and you need to be accountable for this. But this works in highly regulated environments. And frankly, the context, the geopolitics, I won't get into the details, but there are some parts of the world where, It doesn't work as much anymore. But the other one, which is more of the offensive one, which is to say, you can add a lot of value using AI, but you have to do it right. You have to get it right. And that requires investment and expertise. And often the tricky part is not so much the software. Oh, I want to play with AI. Is the expertise that you put around the software. Do you have the right people? Do you offer the right training within your organization? Sometimes you don't need to hire new people. And I think the really thoughtful companies understand that ultimately you want to obviously comply with regulation in these matters, but you want to do good business. Right? And you cannot ride on that business for a long time. You can do quick bucks, right? But ultimately, when trust is broken with your clients and customer base and, broader, trustworthy stakeholders, at some point you will get kicked out of a business, right? So that's why I'd say you need to do both. You need to be defensive and offensive to make it work.
So what you're saying is, how can we ever keep, how can regulation, anything else ever keep up? Because there's huge amounts of money and power and speed and energy behind moving faster and faster and developing new things. How do we slow it up? How do we? But then the question is, it's a very European approach to say slow it up. The American approach is let it rip and then take them to court. And that can, in some ways, that's a way of keeping up. Because especially in America, there's money to be made from suing people who've really screwed up. So regulation alone is probably, I think you're right, too slow. We are going to need we're going to need to throw all the guns, obviously don't throw guns at that's irresponsible. Women, yes. Yeah, we've learned that lesson. Don't throw guns at things. We're going to have to use more than one lever here. And I think that the lever that we are underestimating and undervaluing and would be enormously valuable for more than just AI is educating people to bring their own mind to the question and not just go, computer says X. And that can be done quite quickly. As we learned with the Mr. Bates and the motor, one good TV show can change minds very quickly indeed.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with regulating AI is such a horizontal technology that it's a little bit like regulating spreadsheets, where you can write terrible things in a spreadsheet or you can write great things in a spreadsheet, and there's no one way to regulate it. And another complexity is that things change all the time. So there's no meaningful way for us we don't have a stable base for us to think about certain problems. Like, for example, EU defines certain threshold for how much compute you can spend before your certain regulations apply. I think we blew past that last year. And now what was the point of that exactly? It's not very clear. Then we've got like Gypsy, open source models. Now, okay, you can regulate these ones and others come in. I think it's too unstable. It's too horizontal. And I think it's too much complexity, to actually get it past.
Just one thing on this, like not the different regulators, but I've been thinking also about this, just to bring this perspective. It's ultimately, we do know that you have different regulations at different level of interventions. It's really important to be clear about this. Ultimately, you can say outright by some bad practices. I don't want you to use AI for, basically abuse people's emotions or think like really dodgy things, right? That's really like bottom line. But it's kind of the same. We have the same approach to testing software. I always make the parallel. So if you think about like these large language models, there's some level of testing done at the financial, at this level by these companies. But ultimately, if you're in an insurer or a bank and you're using AI, for credit allocation or, claims management, whatever, you want to do some testing at this level, at the application level, right? Across your stack, you're going to do different level of testing. The same thing with regulation. You have some level of horizontal regulation and some level of vertical regulation, depending on the industry, depending on the risks that you are facing, because risks are really context dependent. Going back to regulation, so you have vertical regulators that are aware of some level of risk in their own industry and want to make sure that these bad outcomes don't occur in this industry. And that's like the kind of bottom line that you should respect as you work into this industry. So again, things haven't been changing dramatically. I think the real trick. What has changed is that software has been built from the beginning to be deterministic. And now we have probabilistic models. And that's tricky now. How to make sure that this probabilistic model we still have some level of control as we have for old software. And that's the tricky bit. Because the rest, frankly, conceptually and legally has been thought out.
This debate reminds me a little bit of I gave a talk nearly 10 years ago at a conference that was in Munich, and it was about AI ethics and what's going to happen. This was this was very speculative. This is coming at some point. We're going to have to make all these decisions, and how do we know that we don't do terrible things because the AI tells us to do it, or the spreadsheet? Somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I think that actually Germany is in a pretty good position globally to not make these kind of bad decisions. And the reason is that we're very aware of, Hannah Arendt and all of those rules. At school, there's a huge concentration on the philosophy of human behavior. We learn about Kant. We learn about, what's right and wrong, whatever. We are taught to do not just follow the crowd because everybody else is doing it. Don't do it. And I thought it was quite interesting. It remains to be seen whether or not that will play out positively. But I thought it was something that it would be interesting to try it out more widely. I think we probably do need to.
Yeah. There's an element of now you're taking on a different direction, but there's an element of critical thinking, obviously. So I was looking at this from an enterprise perspective. But anytime you interact with an AI system, you need to be, aware of it has been designed by someone to some, purpose. It has some biases, some perspective, and have this healthy distance between the outputs that you get. And sometimes that's, I guess, the default, behavior of human beings, just relying on the outputs and not questioning anymore how that output has been produced. And that, I think, goes back to the critical thinking, to the education, to, as a society, we need to learn how to have this healthy distance with these AI agents, these AI systems as they get more and more, impact or, power in our lives.
The things that you mentioned here now start to go a little bit, this has become philosophical. You brought in Kant, I didn't. But I think there was so much there about, okay, we're going to society and we've talked a lot about regulations. We've talked a little bit about education. And again, when it comes back to responsibility, what other levers can we potentially pull, either in the public sector, in the private sector, to be more responsible, or however we collectively agree on an average of this is ethical to do in AI or software going forwards? What have you thought up of, or what have you interacted with that you think is actually this is great, let's do more of this?
That's a good one. I have a side project, maybe I can mention quickly. I'm co-launching a school called the African Olympiad Academy, and it's focused on math Olympiad pedagogy. So I don't know if anyone is familiar with math Olympiad. It's arguably the highest standard to identify and train top math and science students. And the whole thing is about critical thinking and problem solving. Is to train students, they face math problems that they've never seen before. It's really different from our approach of mathematics. And they develop this critical thinking as they engage with a problem. And I think that as AI takes more power and more impact in our society, we need to rethink our curriculum to make sure that we still train students who have critical thinking and problem solving in our curriculum, right? And now, because obviously writing an essay before ChatGPT and now is very different. I can just type it and get something out. But the whole critical thinking process that comes into thinking and drafting this essay is at risk of being gone. And that skill is at risk of being lost. And we cannot afford to have a whole generation who doesn't have this skill anymore. So the question is how school and education systems adapt to this new reality. That's why I got into education, I guess.
Well, I mean, and obviously I'm an author, so I like and I've also been a university lecturer, and entertainment is a very key educator. It's a really good way of getting people to step back and think about things and pay attention. Because, everybody, who wants to read Kant? It's not the most exciting thing. There's only a limited number of people who are going to read that and remember it and apply it day to day. Entertainment, setting, kind of reminding people of the risks and the rewards and all of the issues around us using AI, which is significant, I would love to see more entertainment around that. It's like the Isaac Asimov model.
Yeah, and I think education and literature, I think, or generally, I don't know, TV shows or things like that, I think it's a good way to shape the culture. But beyond that, I'm skeptical. I think we've got any levers, really. I attended it was like a House of Commons roundtable around that. And I remember people talking about doing some general education of the UK population. But I can't imagine what that would look like. What we just sit everyone down, use them, make them use ChatGPT. It's kind of hard to imagine that working. Staffing more staff in schools. I mean, I think they've got enough on beyond that. So I don't think there are any good answers, to be honest. I think it's just hopefully we muddle through like we muddle through other things. But yeah, culture, education.
One thing I want to add as well is one of the core objectives of any regulation is to prevent any abuse of power. One of the risks we're facing is that we're seeing an increasing concentration in the AI industry of some key big actors who have big impacts on the rest of the market. Obviously, that creates some, market dynamics and antitrust issues, but ultimately that's a risk for society. The question becomes, how do we ensure that power is distributed in society at the edge of AI? And that's a big question. It doesn't require that all of us become like, data scientists. I don't think that's important, but we need to have the right checks and balances, again, adapted to that new environment. And that's where I think the thinking should be.
I want to just look about this. This could be a stupid idea, but it'll be interesting. It's an interesting test of the effect of culture and entertainment on what we choose to do with AI, on how quickly we connect AI up to the nuclear arsenal. There's nothing in film. I think also the underrated war games. It's like this over and over again. We're warned: don't connect computers to your nuclear arsenal. Will we? That will be the interesting answer there. We'll find out quite quickly what the results.
Yeah, I hope we don't, because I've got this kind of test that I run through many different models and just ask them, kind of create a scenario and make them basically press the nuclear buttons and see who does it, and they all do it. So maybe don't.
You've done that in your work. You've asked the different the models and so forth. Like you're trying to encourage them to go all the way. And
I would say not professionally.
Okay.
On his spare time only.
Yeah. Just in your spare time, you're trying to create a nuclear apocalypse.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Officially, Moonpig does not possess.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, actually, so don't give away any of your endings from your sci-fi books or any of that. But like, is there anything that you've explored when you're having this creative
tons,
thought
everything,
process?
All the things I've explored, all the things in the books.
Yeah, and like, what would be? So I'm going to actually turn this around because now we've gone very doom and gloom. I'm going to lift us slightly out of nuclear destruction, like some positive ways to message some of this stuff as well, because it matters how you talk about this stuff.
Oh, I love AI. I use it all the time. I talk to ChatGPT all the time, and I find it really steps up your thinking. It really takes you to a new level. I would say I'm a pretty creative person. If I talk to ChatGPT, I can become more creative. I have to constantly say no to ChatGPT. No, with your ideas, just calm down, because I can't put all of these things in a book because it's idea overload. Just like focus on a few things, and we'll talk about those. It is actually a really, really amazing creative partner. I don't know how everybody else find. What do you like about it?
Yeah, I think they're incredibly creative, and there are many definitions of creativity. But for us, for example, we are quite creative business, so I'm testing how many ideas they can come up with for greeting cards, things like that, and they're extremely good. The only caveat is that they do have a tendency to, if you ask them for an idea many times, they kind of tend to cluster. So sometimes there is a little bit of narrowing of creativity. So you need to be careful that it doesn't just kind of collapse into that one space. And there is a certain way you can approach them to expand their creativity. So there's definitely, it's a big unknown beast of how you kind of explore their creativity.
I'll you a different perspective on this. I don't like to use AI for creative activities, but rather like for repetitive tasks. I think, thinking about using AI agents, and when I'm working with my clients, I want to take away all the boring stuff, because I think, to your point, imagination, creativity, that's where as human beings, we're really, really good. We tend, again, to undervalue our capabilities in this space. I would argue that we're still much better than these probabilistic machines, ultimately. And so, yeah, that's my take, at least.
I to be honest, I never follow any of its ideas, because it's always got it's never quite the right. It's always too fast, too far. In fact, what you realize quite quickly when you write a lot of books is that you have to take people through quite gradually. You can't have sort of giant leaps, otherwise everybody's good. So it has to. Oddly enough, it's too out there, really, to be used in a novel. I would say it's not sufficiently good at gradual narrative flow.
But it's almost making us more responsible in a strange way, because then you have to be like, all right, calm down, ChatGPT. Or I mean, another example is if I'm doing work, it would be I would ask it like, is there anything wrong with this? Or check the regulations for me so I can be responsible. I can't even think of them. Or, it's important to message in the right way. Like, is this actually going to offend anyone? Have I not thought of this the right way because I'm tired? And that makes me more responsible as well. Yeah.
But you also have to check absolutely, because it likes to say yes. Yeah. So, I remember the other week, I was trying to get it to automate a very boring task for me, which was I had a web page that I'd already written, and I just wanted it turned into a PDF, because PDF export is a bit rubbish. It just tends to be all over the place. And I just wanted it to look exactly like the website, but as a PDF. I said, can you do this? And it said, oh, yeah, I can. I said, well, can you do this? And here's the link. Can you download it? And it's, okay, here it is. Here's the download. I thought, this is good. This has saved me loads of time. So I clicked on it, and it said no such file. I thought, well, I was sort of. So I said, I clicked on it, and it said no such file. It said, oh yeah, no, actually I can't do it. I just made all that up. But here is a website that will do it for you. In fact, it was a really good. It saved me loads of time. So I went to their website and did it, and I wouldn't have found that website. But the whole interaction we'd had earlier was just complete hallucination.
I think like the hallucination element, and when we come back to responsibility, we're going to start closing up a bit. Like, it's also about, isn't it, like telling the truth is a big thing. Let's forget about regulations. Let's go to the bare bones of responsibility. You want something to be honest? Do you want people to be honest with you? And like, how do you kind of come to terms with that, or how do you educate your educators, your maybe managers and team leads in companies? Like, what do you go back to first principles when you're talking about responsibility in AI before we get to the regulations?
That's a really good one. I think we tend to attribute to these machines like very human qualities. You mentioned like honest and so on. And ultimately, again, most people are quite technical. We test softwares. No one trusts softwares. Like, it would be crazy to say I put something into production because I trust. Ask him a question, he gave me back an answer. I trust that answer. That would be crazy. So the question is, what are the capabilities, the genuine capabilities of your machines, and where the human being should be involved, and it should be making the decision ultimately, right? And I think it's finding that balance between what you can delegate and what you still hold as a stakeholder. And I think it's easy in highly regulated industries, but I think it's healthy in other industries as well, because what I see is people are attributing too much, they delegate too much decision-making power to their AI systems, because they don't fully understand the limitations. It goes back to the testing. The more you test, the more you understand the limitations. So it's really important to continuously test.
So it's interesting you say that about other industry. I think there's an awful lot we can learn here about our approach to AI, bizarrely from a completely different industry, which is the aviation industry. Something called human factors, sometimes called crew resource management, is all about not just blindly following orders. So it used to be there were loads of plane crashes because the pilot reckoned that they weren't about to run out of fuel, but every single other person thought they were about to run out of fuel, and they ran out of fuel and crashed. Because the culture was no one questioned the pilot. So there's been an awful lot of work going on in the aviation industry around everybody kind of contributing their own opinion so that nobody fears pointing out, Mr. Captain, we're about to run out of fuel, and everybody else goes, yes, I've noticed that too. We should probably do something about it. It's following on following orders is a very, very dangerous thing to do. But we have learned that in other industries. There are lessons that we can apply.
Yeah, and I think every time when someone has the experience of maybe something embarrassing happening with hallucinated, something like that, I think you learn that they're not 100% reliable. Another good way to learn is if you ask the same thing 5 to 10 times and you just see how much variation there is in the responses. So you can also get a gist for how reliable it is. But I really think there's no real other way to get a good intuition for how good these models are, where they fail, before you really spend time with them. There's just no way for you to read an article and extrapolate that properly. There's just too much small details about how they behave that you have to really try yourself.
One thing that you mentioned, I think, is very important, is hallucination. That's a big term in the industry now, right? Take a minute to think about what is an hallucination. Well, sometimes it's something incorrect or something completely made up, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I'm going to give you a really concrete use case. Let's say that you're working in insurance for 20 years. You've acquired a lot of expertise about, let's say underwriting, contracts. And someone who has just started within a month versus someone who's been 20 years in the industry have very different level of expertise and ability to catch something wrong. So now the question becomes, as you're delegating, you're giving more and more power to this AI to draft these contracts, and you have junior employees interacting with them, are they good enough to pick up on the wrong things? Do you have enough expertise in that domain to correct the machine, to correct the model, and ultimately improve it? And that's what we did at Currie, like try to collect expert feedback. Expertise is still really, really important. And that's a real danger, is you have people getting into the industry, using this, relying too much on these technologies, and ultimately never building expertise. And being dependent on faulty machines will make mistakes at some point. And I think that's a bigger question about the future of work. How do you still create space for people to acquire expertise while making the most of these machines, understanding their core limitations so that they can maximize their benefits? That's really tricky. That balance is hard to get.
Yeah.
I'm quite interested in your point. I mean, you made a really interesting point there about if you play with them, you learn that they're wrong. And so anyone who's using them now is playing with them. You're constantly running across issues and you're learning, it's useful in some ways, but it makes a lot of mistakes, and I will learn. One of the interesting things will be, as it gets better and better, one of the things about regulation and testing is it will get better and better and better. And then actually, I would say that's a more dangerous point, because at this point, if you play with it, you're going to go, well, I know that 50% of the time is just telling me nonsense, so I'm not going to rely on it too much. But when it's right 99.9% of the time, that's when you're going to really start relying on that being right all the time. But then that's the trick true with people as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about treating it a bit like a person, because we don't let people decide, underwriting strategy or something all by themselves. So we've got procedures, we've got committees and other ways to tackle it. So yeah, maybe that would be the way. But I agree, that would be the scary part when it's almost there.
I love how we're ending on more bureaucracy. Yay. There's like a minute left, and I think I want to give a space for each of you to give really practical advice to the audience and the community here today. Like, if you have one thing that you want people to go away and just start doing or start thinking about, or just plant a seed in their heads, like, what would it be? So over to you to close us off and give us a non-nuclear answer, please.
Well, it's easy for me.
Yeah.
What you should go away and do is read my Panopticon series. It covers an awful lot of this stuff, and an awful lot. If you've read the Panopticon series, you won't make any of these mistakes.
That's a good one. Don't get too distracted by AI. Stay close to the business problem. What are you trying to solve? Again, risks are really contextual. Bring in the domain knowledge expert into the room. Don't think that can be replaced overnight by any piece of software. And try to make sure that this piece of software is there to augment that expertise, not to replace it. I think the danger becomes when you think, well, I can get rid of someone now that I have this, it's much cheaper. Usually that's how you get into trouble.
Yeah, and from my perspective, what I mentioned before, you have to play with these things. And to give you an example, OpenAI released a new image generation model that is very different from the others. And I spent last night after our dinner and this morning just playing, testing the model. Because otherwise, if I just read the press release and kind of assume that I know, I would be completely wrong. You really cannot get the intuition for this unless you try. There's just no other way. So just try it, and whatever your role is, if it's oversight, if you're a practitioner, it doesn't really matter. Without knowing, you can't really contribute.
Awesome. That's been great. I wish we had more time, but Anne, Lofred, Peter, thank you so much for a great discussion, and big round of applause for our panelists, please.